Ron Howard's story isn't just about movies. It's about survival, resilience, and the quiet storm of life that forges greatness. We've all heard his name. For some, it's the red-headed boy from the Andy Griffith Show, the wholesome Opie, the son we all wish we had. For others, it's Richie Cunningham from Happy Days, a symbol of innocence in a time when the world seemed simpler. But Ron is so much more than that. He's a visionary director behind iconic films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind. But even the brightest stars can't escape the weight of their own history. Behind the accolades and fame, there's a man whose journey is filled with struggles, setbacks, and a painful understanding that sometimes greatness comes at a cost. Imagine growing up in the spotlight before you even have a chance to understand what it means to live without it. Ron was only a toddler when the cameras first found him. Born in Duncan, Oklahoma, in 1954, his parents, both working actors, were no strangers to the demands of the entertainment industry. By the time Ron was 18 months old, the world he would know was already a world of studio lights, call sheets, and the constant hum of film sets. His childhood wasn't filled with playgrounds and soccer games, but with the undercurrent of a world that moved fast, too fast for a young boy to keep up. His family's move to California in the mid-1950s brought the promise of a brighter future, but also the pressure of an industry that doesn't care who you are, it only cares if you fit the mold. By the age of 6, Ron had already become Opie Taylor, a beloved character on the Andy Griffith Show. But while the world saw him as America's son, Ron saw something else, an isolation that came with fame. His classrooms were often cramped trailers behind the sound stages, where he tried to focus on his schoolwork while the noise of the set filtered in. His friends were colleagues, actors he worked with, not kids he could play with. There were no schoolyard games, no recess, just the harsh realities of the business. As he got older, the weight of fame began to feel more like a prison than a privilege. At 13, Ron found himself trapped in a role that defined him, that the world refused to let him escape. Opie Taylor, the charming, innocent boy who had won America's heart, became a shackle. "I didn't know who I was without that character," he later admitted, a statement that revealed just how deeply the role had become intertwined with his identity. Ron's journey wasn't just about acting. It was about surviving an industry that doesn't easily let go of the past. When the show The Monroes failed after just 26 episodes, Ron felt the sting of Hollywood's cold judgment. He blamed himself, wondering if his time had already passed, if his future in the industry had already been written. And yet, he picked himself up. When Happy Days came along, it seemed like a chance to escape the shadow of Opie. But even then, Hollywood saw him as a supporting character. He wasn't the star the world was more interested in Fonzie. Through all the doubts, through every door that closed, Ron refused to let go of his dream. He turned the pain into passion. Instead of letting the world's expectations define him, he defined himself. Behind every rejection, behind every failed project, was a fire that kept burning, pushing him forward, fueling his ambition. When Ron turned to directing, it was a decision born not just out of necessity, but out of a deep desire to reshape his legacy. The shift wasn't easy. In the early 1980s, as he began directing films like Night Shift and Splash, the industry didn't immediately embrace him. They doubted him, laughed at his ideas, but Ron pushed through. Splash was seen as a silly fantasy, but became a box office hit, proving to the world and to himself that he was more than just Opie, more than just Richie Cunningham. As the years went on, his films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind became testaments to his vision, to his ability to transform personal struggle into artistic triumph. But even as he found success, there were moments when the pressure seemed unbearable. With each success came the fear that it could all fall apart at any moment. And it did. In 1999, EDTV bombed at the box office, a painful blow to Ron's career. It was the first time he questioned everything about the foundation of his success, his identity as a filmmaker. But that failure didn't break him. It forced him to reinvent himself, to push harder, to go deeper into his craft. It wasn't just about making movies anymore. It was about proving that he had more to offer, that his story wasn't over. His journey was marked by highs and lows, by moments of doubt and moments of unwavering belief. He built Imagine Entertainment, a company that would change the landscape of television and film, But even that came with sacrifices. The pressure of overseeing so many projects took a toll, and the fear of failure never fully left. And then came Solo, a Star Wars story, a film that seemed destined for success, but instead became a public failure. The backlash was swift and brutal. For the first time in his career, Ron questioned if the industry still wanted him, if he had anything left to offer. But in the quiet moments after the storm, he found something remarkable. He found the strength to keep going. Ron's journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Through the failures, the losses, the doubts, he never stopped fighting. And when his latest film Eden underperformed at the box office, it was another reminder that the road to greatness is never smooth. But Ron has learned that greatness isn't about the applause, the box office numbers, or the accolades. It's about the courage to keep going, to keep telling stories, even when the world stops clapping. Ron Howard's legacy isn't built on the successes we see. It's built on the quiet moments of perseverance, on the resilience to rise every time life knocks him down. It's about embracing the storms, finding meaning in the struggle, and proving that no matter how many times you fall, you can always get back up. And in that journey, Ron Howard isn't just a Hollywood icon. He's a symbol of what it means to truly endure. For Ron Howard, greatness wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about walking through them, even when the world thought he wouldn't make it. After surviving public doubts and financial blows, an old wound reopened, a wound that had been there long, before Hollywood truly respected him. It wasn't about rivalry or betrayal, but the cold machinery of fame and the unspoken comparisons to Henry Winkler. In 1974, when Happy Days launched, Ron was at heart. At 19, he was America's steady son, the red-haired, gentle guy everyone loved. But by 1975, everything shifted when Fonzie entered the scene. Henry Winkler, with his leather jacket and magnetic charisma, stole the spotlight. Suddenly, fan mail flooded in for Henry. Posters flew off the shelves. Magazine covers begged for him. And Ron, barely old enough to vote, was left feeling like his footing had slipped away. A reporter even asked him in 1976, "How does it feel to be second place on your own show?" Ron's smile never faltered, but internally, it felt like a punch he saw coming too late. But here's the truth that people misunderstood for decades. Ron's pain was never about Henry. Henry never demanded more, never pushed Ron aside. He was humble, generous, and kind. The hurt came from the system, from the studios, from the way fame reshapes a young man's identity. Without permission, Ron admitted years later, "I felt disrespected, not by Henry, but by the business." That was the wound that stuck with him. It wasn't losing the spotlight. It was being replaced in his own story. It dug deep, stayed long, and came back when he least expected it. But here's where the miracle lies. While the world whispered about rivalry, Ron and Henry built something that couldn't be twisted by media loyalty. Henry didn't just stand by Ron on set. He stood by him off set, too. He became the godfather to all four of Ron's children. When Ron shifted from acting to directing, Henry never flinched. He supported him fully. And in 2002, when Ron won the Academy Award for A Beautiful Mind, Henry was backstage, wiping away tears. "He earned every bit of this," he whispered. In that moment, as Ron stepped into the spotlight, he realized that the last remnants of that old wound had finally healed. Their bond wasn't about competition. It was about survival. It was about two young men facing the unpredictable storm of fame, choosing grace over ego, loyalty over fear, and truth over gossip. It's a lesson that anyone who's ever felt overshadowed or overlooked can understand. The world may choose a favorite, but the heart chooses its family. But Ron's story isn't just about fame. It's about the quiet pain of personal battles. Behind all the Ron wept with pride. They were broken, but they were whole accolades. There's a man who learned that even the harshest storms can be weathered when you have someone to stand beside you. Ron's marriage to Cheryl, lasting more than 50 years, wasn't perfect. It was tested by time, by distance, and by the pressures of Hollywood. In the early days, when they were struggling in their tiny Los Angeles apartment, love was their foundation. It was the scent of burnt toast, Cheryl's ink-stained notebooks, and the joy of two dreamers building a life together. When their children arrived, Bryce in 1981, the twins in 1985, Read in 1987. But life has a way of testing even the strongest beams. After filming Far and Away in Ireland, Ron returned home to find his daughter hesitant, unsure of the stranger who had walked through the door. That moment broke him. He realized that while he had been chasing dreams, he had missed so many small moments that should have been his. Cheryl, meanwhile, had been carrying the weight of raising their children alone, feeling abandoned by the very life they had built together. Their conversations turned sharp, their silences heavier. The pressures of their careers, financial losses, and the strain of an industry that demands more than it gives began to erode the foundation of their relationship. But despite the pain, they chose each other. They learned to share the weight of their struggles. The numbers on the spreadsheets were painful, but the real pain came from the quiet fear that they might not make it through. In the darkest moments, when the losses seemed too much to bear, Cheryl would sit beside Ron and say, "You could lose everything we own and you'd still have me." And that truth became the anchor that kept them together. Through the years, their love wasn't measured by grand gestures or perfect moments. It was shaped by resilience, by choosing each other when everything else seemed to be falling apart. They weathered the storms together. And in doing so, they rediscovered the truth that had kept them standing for over 50 years. Love isn't about what life spares you. It's about what you refuse to let it take away. But Ron's story of survival didn't end with fame or love. It continued with his family. In the 1980s and 1990s, his brother Clint, once full of life, fell into the grip of addiction. Ron watched helplessly as Clint's choices began to destroy him. But Ron never gave up on him. There were nights when Clint called, slurring his words, ashamed of himself. Ron drove across town to find him broken, struggling to hold on to the life he had built. In the quiet, late-night moments, Ron knew he had to draw a line. "Go to rehab or I'll lose you," he told Clint. It wasn't anger. It was the sharpest form of love. Clint agreed. And though recovery wasn't easy, slowly, Ron began to see glimpses of the brother he had feared he'd lost. It wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't a quick fix. But it was a story of survival, of compassion stronger than fear, and the realization that addiction isn't a failure of character. It's a battle that demands every ounce of courage. Years later, when they wrote The Boys, Clint spoke about those dark chapters not to excuse them, but to acknowledge the family that had always been there, standing between him and the edge. Ron wrote of him with the tenderness of someone who had held on through storms that could have torn them apart. But the storm didn't stop there. Ron's mother, Jean, the quiet anchor of his world, began to fade. Her health declined, and in 2000, when her heart failed, Ron found himself standing by her hospital bed, holding her fragile hand. Her absence was a force no award, no career milestone could soften. And so, Ron Howard's story is not just one of fame, fortune, or Hollywood triumphs. It's a story of resilience, of surviving the storms life throws at you. It's about the love you choose, the people who stand beside you, and the courage to keep moving forward even when everything seems to be falling apart. In the end, it's not about the battles you win. It's about the ones you keep fighting, and the hearts you never let go of along the way. Ron Howard's journey is a powerful testament to resilience, love, and the unshakable foundation of family. It's a story built not on the recognition of fame, but on the quiet moments that truly define a life. From the bright lights of Hollywood to the still, silent spaces of grief and reflection, Ron's path has never been simple. It's a life marked by highs and lows, by love lost and found again, and by an understanding that greatness doesn't come from what you have, but from what you overcome. It all began long before Hollywood ever knew his name, before he became a household face on The Andy Griffith Show and Happy Days. Ron's roots were in a humble, loving family, where his mother, Jean, was the steady light guiding him through complexities of fame. But when Jean passed away, it felt as though the very essence of his life dimmed. Losing her wasn't just a loss of a parent. It was a loss of a part of himself, a part that had always seen him as Ron, not as Opie Taylor or Richie Cunningham. The world outside might have known him as a rising star, but his mother knew him in a way no one else could. That kind of loss isn't loud. It doesn't come with a dramatic exit. It leaves an emptiness that echoes quietly, slowly seeping into every corner of life. And yet, despite the deep void left by his mother's passing, Ron's life didn't come to a halt. His father's decline into heart disease and cognitive deterioration was another blow, one that was less sudden but just as painful. Watching his father, Rance, who had once been his rock, slowly fade away, was a deeply personal journey that was difficult for anyone to understand. For Ron, this loss wasn't just about the decline of an elderly parent. It was a loss of the man who had shaped him, taught him how to act with honesty, discipline, and grace. As his father's life gently slipped away, Ron found himself reflecting on the legacy that had been passed down. Despite the quiet sorrow, there was an unspoken strength in the way he carried himself, standing not only as a son, but as a man who had learned from the example set before him. When Rance passed in 2017, it was as if Ron had lost the last person who truly knew him before the world ever did, the last person who could call him son and make him feel like one. But even after losing so much, life kept testing him. The storms didn't stop coming. Just when he was beginning to steady himself after his parents' passing, another wave of grief hit. Cindy Williams, a beloved co-star from American Graffiti and a dear friend, passed away in 2023. Ron and Cindy had shared a youthful connection between two dreamers starting out in a whirlwind of Hollywood glamour. She was a constant, a kind soul who brought warmth and joy in those early years. To lose her, so suddenly and so unexpectedly, was a blow that cut deeper than most could understand. The grief was quiet but profound. Cindy had been a bright light during a time when Ron was still finding his way. Her laughter, her unguarded presence, reminded him of the optimism that once came so effortlessly. She had been a companion through a time when life felt full of potential, before the weight of fame and success began to settle in. Her passing left Ron with a deep ache, a void shaped like the girl who had once filled those California nights with laughter and light. Yet, despite her loss, her memory continues to burn brightly in the corners of his heart, reminding him that some friendships never fade. They simply wait, glowing softly in the dark, until we remember. At 71, Ron stands in a place few ever reach, a place defined not by the fanfare of success, but by quiet triumph. His net worth now rests at nearly $200 million. But he'll be the first to tell you that the wealth isn't in the numbers. His wealth is in the foundation he's built through decades of hard work, perseverance, and the lessons passed down from his parents. It's in the steady, meaningful relationships that he has nurtured. It's in the legacy of Imagine Entertainment, the films that defined him, and the way he quietly continues to give back by donating millions to scholarships, children, hospitals, and veterans programs, with no need for recognition. Ron's story has never been about the material. It's about the moments that matter, the quiet dinners with family, the weekend visits from his children and grandchildren, the stillness of early morning walks with Cheryl, and the peace that comes from knowing you've lived with integrity. Through all the storms, through the losses that have tested him, Ron has learned that the true fortune in life is not found in possessions, but in the connections you nurture and the legacy you leave behind. Today, Ron Howard walks through his days with a quiet strength. The houses, the cars, the success, those are the chapters of his life. But the real measure of his wealth is the family he has built, the friendships that have sustained him, and the love that endures despite the losses. Ron's story teaches us that greatness isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about how many times you stand back up after life knocks you down, how you keep going even when the road gets tough, and how you always remember that no storm, no matter how fierce, lasts forever. If Ron's journey moved you, we invite you to like, comment, and share the story. Let's walk through our days with love, kindness, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving life's storms. May you find the peace that comes from knowing the true riches of life, love, family, and unwavering integrity.